Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalai. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of Ask Noah kicks off this hour. Josh writes in and says, "Hey Noah, all at home, at points in the past, I've created bootable USB drives with Linux using DD, pen drive Linux, etc. However, I've never had great success getting the device to boot with a PC and a Mac. What is the best way recommended for creating USB bootable flash drives that work across PC and Mac with UEFI and or BIOS? Thanks, Josh." So we'll start here, Josh. I actually do use DD. That's how I burn all of my USB flash sticks. And that should work for you. Make sure that you're specifying at the very end of your command, sudo dd, specify the block size, the input device, the output device, and then at the end, add a space, 2 ampersands, so ampersand, and then a space, and then the word sync. And what that will do is prevent you from removing the USB media too soon. What might be happening, Josh, is it might be writing parts of that file to the flash drive, and you may be ejecting the drive or pulling it out before it's actually finished writing, and that's why you're not able to use that drive to install Linux. On 2004, the media checks by default to see if the USB media has been made correctly, and this is why. Because it stops a lot of errors. And the number of times that we've responded to a trouble call where somebody says, "Hey, this USB thing isn't booting," and we take a look at it, and it turns out the install media is flawed. And that can be because of a faulty ISO. It can be because there was a problem during writing. It can be because you took it out too soon. And so by default, 2004 is going to check to make sure that the image was written properly to the flash drive. And this keeps people from wiping out their perfectly working installation off of their system in place for one that they attempted to install from a USB stick and then failed. I dealt with this myself just a few weeks ago, and it's frustrating because if you don't have a backup drive to recover your installation from or to begin a new installation, then you're stuck with a non-bootable operating system. And worse yet, if you don't have a second machine to use to create a second backup bootable installation, then you can't recover your system. So that's why that's on by default. Now, I've listed the DD command that I use in the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com/201. Don't copy and paste it. Make sure that you're using the right drive letter here. I chose SDB by default. Because on my machine, that's what's going to show up as the first flash drive I plug in. But I've also given you the command lsblk, and that's going to list your block devices and or drives. And you're going to want to make sure to run lsblk and take a look at which drive matches up to the size capacity of your flash drive. So you plug in a 16 gigabyte flash drive. You're going to look to see which drive letter, SDA, SDB, SDC, is going to be assigned to that flash drive. Now, if that doesn't work for you still, there is another option. There's a graphical option. There's a software called Etcher.io, and Etcher is a graphical software for writing ISOs and image files to the flash drive. Now, one of the features that they advertise is that it verifies the image after it's been burned to the flash drive. So this should solve a lot of your issues. It's free and open source. It has a beautiful interface, and it's cross-compatible. It works on all systems. It works on Mac, Linux, and Windows. And so no matter what operating system you're starting from, what operating system you're trying to go to, Etcher is a great way for you to do that. They provide it as an app image on Linux, so you just have to download it, right-click on it, click on Properties, find the tick box that says Make Executable, and you'll be writing USB drives in no time. Now, if you're on a Windows box or a Mac box, you can do the same thing. Go ahead and download the application. Mac, it's going to be a DMG. Windows, it's going to be an executable. But either way, the software is going to function the way you expect it to. Give that a shot, Josh. If it doesn't work, give me an email back or give us a call at 866-280-14 or 855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Aiden White writes in and says, since hearing your show on the current capabilities of IP security cameras, I've started to look at them myself, but for a slightly different purpose. I'm interested in watching a bird feeder. I'm looking for a good quality image, weatherproof, some sort of night vision, as well as being completely wireless and LAN only. The camera will probably be sitting 10 to 15 feet from the actual feeder. Do you have any suggestions on a camera and software that might work for this? So I'll tell you right off the bat, the most difficult part of your question is the wireless part, because there are two things that come through the Ethernet wire that run the camera. And the first is obviously the data connection. Now, Wi-Fi has existed for a long enough time, and it's reliable enough that we can get by with Wi-Fi cameras as long as we have decent access points within range. The second function, though, that Ethernet jack or Ethernet cable usually provides is power to the camera. Now, this is going to be much more difficult, not impossible, but much more difficult to replicate out in a tree or on a bird stand. Now, if you have your bird feeder very close to some other power source, obviously your problem is solved. But I'm going to assume that you don't have power very close to the bird feeder, and I was trying to come up with a different way that we could solve this problem for you. So the first thing I did, we're going to have to find some power. Now, there's a nuclear reactor in the sky that we can take advantage of if we have some hardware. And so what I would do is take a small little 100-watt solar panel, and I would connect that into an adapter made by a company out of Texas that it's essentially a PoE injector, but it's a PoE injector that allows you to interface with some things that aren't so quite standard, right? So usually a PoE injector just has a AC power cord. You plug it in, plug your network into one, plug the other cable into whatever the device you want to power, and it takes the network, combines it with the power, and away you go. This device does very much the same thing, except you can take the feed from a 12-volt power source. And this is beneficial because it allows us to attach a battery to our solar panel, and that when the sun is out, it's going to charge up the battery, and then the battery will power the power over Ethernet injector and thus power the camera. Now, Axis has a wide lineup of cameras, to include ones in their P series that will connect over Wi-Fi. So if you want to go this route, that's the direction I would go. If you find, which I think you very well might find, that it will be a lot easier to trench a cable in the ground or string a cable up than it is to try to build some sort of contraption that will power this camera outdoors. If you find that you want to do that, I would recommend using something like Tough Cable from Ubiquiti. In addition to having a much stronger weather-resistant jacket, it also features a small grounding wire inside of the cable that can be attached securely to each end of the RJ45 connector. And then that RJ45 connector has metal connectors that will then connect to a grounding system, either on the UEFI switch or on the other end if you have a camera. So I would recommend using that cable if you do a hardwired cable run. That will open you up to a couple of options. So the first option I have for you is the Axis M2025LE. This is going to give you a resolution of 2560 by just under 1900. I know they don't have the second resolution listed here, but it's not 1920. If you purchase that camera, anytime you're looking for outdoor wildlife photography, the higher the resolution, the better. So obviously, if you can afford a 4K camera, go that route. For me, the minimum would be 1080p, and the 2025 surpasses that 2560 by 1920. The other option I had for you is we could actually build this from scratch. Pine 64 has a camera out, an IP-based camera. Now, this would be somewhat of a project. This would not be you just buy it and plug it in. If you want to just buy it and plug it in, go buy yourself an Axis M2025LE or go look at their P-Series. It's going to cost you a little bit more, but you get Wi-Fi. But no matter which camera you go for, if you just want one to purchase, buy it, screw it up. Both of the Axis series are going to be weatherproof, so you're not going to have a problem from that standpoint. But the Pine 64 provides if I was doing this project, if I wanted to go get video or capture things from a birdhouse, what I would do is I'd purchase this Pine 64 camera, and I might try to build it into the birdhouse so you can actually look out the birdhouse and the birds can come in and see. You'll have some weather. I mean, it won't be completely weatherproof because obviously the front of the birdhouse will be open. But I think you could build it in such a way that it stayed out of the way of most of the elements. And if you couldn't, there are outdoor enclosures from B&H Photo Video. I have one link for you in the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com. It's called the Pelco Outdoor Enclosure. And it's a IP camera enclosure that you can use to make any camera weather resistant, to include the Pine 64 IP camera. Now, one important note with the Pine 64, they are not considered a production device. It is decidedly a dev kit. So it's something that you are going to have to build. But, you know, the M2025, I think, is almost $400. So for the price difference of under $100, even with the enclosure, and then you get to build the camera the way that you want to build the camera and have it do the thing that you want to do. It's going to come with a basic Linux installation. So what you're going to have to do is find a way to generate an RTSP or RTMP stream. There's a couple different ways you can do that. You could do that with VLC. We'll do that. FFmpeg will do that. And so you could set that up to just to start a camera stream, and then you can pull that in the exact same way that you'd pull in any other camera stream from Dahua or UEFI or Axis or any of the other companies, and that is through like something like a Synology NVR installed with surveillance stations. If that doesn't work, give me a call back or shoot me an email. Our next email comes from who is this from? Internet Filtering. It doesn't, headset recommendations. I'm spending more of my day on Zoom, and I'm looking to purchase a medium to high-end headset and microphone combination. Do you have any recommendations? Thanks, David. So typically, my go-to headset when companies or businesses ask, it's typically because they're doing some sort of communication, and for that, I tend to recommend Plantronics. Plantronics has been the headset manufacturer, microphone headset manufacturer for NASA for years, and they always produce high-quality, very high-end products that deliver, and you get what you pay for. Typically, telephony is assumed that it's going over something like G711 at 64 kilobits per second. And the quality of this, or the quality of an ordinary phone call, is just not going to be great. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense for Plantronics or other headset manufacturers, if they're manufacturing for telecommunications, to put a lot of research time and effort into a microphone. These days, in the era of COVID, we are doing a lot of our communication from the computer. And of course, with the computer, things like the Opus codec, which provides an almost indistinguishable from in-person quality. The microphone quality does matter. And so I try to stay away from things that are specifically made for telephony if quality is a factor here. So there's a few options you can go with. The first is, if you want the absolute best quality, what you're wanting to do is separate out your devices. So just like a spork doesn't make a particularly great fork and it doesn't make a particularly great spoon, but you get a fork and a spoon in one, the same thing is true for any sort of combined audio device. Any microphone that has a digital to audio converter, that is to say, instead of having an audio connector, instead it has a USB connector. What they're doing is they're building in that audio interface into the microphone itself. And as you might imagine, when you call China and say, hey, I want to buy an audio interface, and the key thing here is we need it to fit inside of the microphone itself, you can understand the kind of quality that you're going to get out of that. And so what I start with is a really great audio interface, and I'm partial to the Zoom U22. Now, this is a small little audio interface, and I typically use it anytime I have somewhere where I need to get a professional microphone into a computer in the least expensive way possible. The U22 can be powered off of batteries, or it can be powered off of the USB bus. It comes with a dedicated input gain as well as a dedicated headphone monitor output. Tiny little device, can fit in your pocket, and costs $99 on Amazon. Now, I pair that with a boundary microphone, and this is a microphone that is, if you've ever been to a hockey game or a basketball game, they have little microphones around the court, and that's what allows you to hear like the stick or the ice noise and stuff like that. That's known as a boundary microphone. They're about $90, and I've taken one of those and placed it on my desk. And that allows me to speak just as if I had the microphone in my laptop, but it's going to offer a much better experience. And then if I need to do something where quality is everything, so for example, I'm filling in on the air, or I'm giving an interview, making an important business call, then I tend to use a headset. And I use a broadcast headset made by a company called Sennheiser. And that will plug into the exact same USB audio interface that I had the boundary microphone. The difference is I'm going to get a much better microphone and a much better sound because the microphone is closer to my house and it's a little bit more directional. This also gives me the opportunity to tie it into a mixer, and so I can feed other audio back to the remote caller, like laptop, my phone, etc. If you want the cheapest, I just need to get it done, I need something that I can order on Amazon, and I don't have hundreds of dollars to spend on it, then I'm going to recommend the Jeecoo, Jeecoo, Xperia USB Pro Gaming Headset. It's less than $30. It's available to Amazon Prime. It works natively on Linux. It has a built-in USB audio DAC, but the nice thing about it is it's got thousands and thousands of reviews from people that are very happy with the quality. And so if you're looking to split the difference between those two, that's something that I would take a look at, that Jeecoo Xperia. I'll have a link for you in the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Stephen writes in, "Hello, Noah. I filter my home internet using Smoothwall on a VM and OpenDNS. The VM is a giant HP2U server, and it's very loud, and it's heating up my room. I'd like to ditch this big server, but I'd like to retain the following capabilities. I'd like to filter the internet, no porn or malware sites, etc. I'd like to be able to block specific websites. I would like the ability to schedule access to the internet, turn off at bedtime. Performance is very important to me. The solution can't slow down the internet too much. I would love to be able to use all open source or open hardware. I have Dan's Guardian, now E2 Guardian Circle, and others in the past. Dan Guardian was my favorite because it would filter based on content of the page rather than a curated list of sites, but it required a lot of tinkering. Thanks, Stephen." So, Stephen, if I was looking for an all-in-one solution, I would probably start with pfSense. pfSense is going to allow you to do all of the scheduling, all of the content filtering you're looking to do, and performance is going to be incredible. It's also open source, and so it's available. You can install it on an existing piece of hardware. If you have it, you can purchase dedicated tiny little boxes that are fanless and noiseless and very good on cooling, by the way, such as the SG1100. And you also have the option to use an add-on called pfBlocker NG, which provides pfSense Firewall the ability to make an allow or deny decision based on the items such as geolocation, IP address, Alexa rating, domain name, those kinds of things. And so this is going to allow you to filter a little bit easier. I mean, you could go in and just make manual rules, right? Find something that it can latch onto. The pfSense can identify a particular site you don't want to be delivered, and you can go ahead and kill that. That's one way to do it. But pfBlocker NG provides you an additional way to do it. Now, you could get away with the filtering, and you could do that on a Pi-hole. Indeed, this is how I'm doing my house. I have a Pi-hole that sits there, and that's what's resolving all of my DNS requests. The problem with that is scheduling the internet. And I'm not sure how within Pi-hole itself you could handle that, particularly if it's on a per client basis. What we've done at our house is we use the Pi-hole for filtering, and then we control the access to the internet for the kids through UEFI's management of SSIDs. So their Wi-Fi shuts off at a given time, and that gives us the ability to all be on one network. So if we want to play Minecraft or browse a file server, so on and so forth, those kinds of things are going to work great. We all connect to the same network. They just lose access to their SSID earlier than we do. Hope that helps. I've linked a guide to using pfBlocker in the show notes. You can find that at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Sometimes it can be useful to run the same program multiple times. Sometimes you need to simulate two different users, or you need to try one particular program in two different ways. Well, Snapcraft allows you the ability to run snaps as parallel installs. Parallel installs enable you to run multiple instances of the same snap on the same system. Each instance is completely isolated from all other instances, including its configuration, interface connections, data locations, services, applications, and aliases. Now, this feature is considered experimental. In particular, the snap install will fail if it has the same name already installed. So you can't just install it twice. You got to do something. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but not much. You start by just entering the command sudo snap set system space experimental.parallel -instances equals true, and we'll have that command for you in the show notes. You'll need snapd version 2.36 or later if you want to use the parallel installs with strictly confined snaps, and you're going to need version 2.43 or later if you want to use snaps using the classic confinement. This is really useful, not only from a troubleshooting standpoint, But it's also useful from the standpoint that, again, sometimes you need to simulate users, and sometimes you need to say, can this user talk to this user, or can this thing do this thing? And if I put it here, how fast does this go here? Being able to run both of those instances on the same machine in their own containers is what I think is going to push container technology into as the default standard for the desktop, because you not only have the security and flexibility that comes with it, now you have the ability to use that for troubleshooting and moving forward. So excited to see that. And so if you weren't aware of that, go ahead and enable the multiple instances features and give that a shot. Our gadget of the week. Most of you know that I've been in the market for quite some time for a really great pocket PC. If you've ever met up with me at a conference or you've ever met me in person, you know that I take my laptop everywhere with me. And I do that because I never know when I'm going to need instant access to my company and to email and all of the resources I have. Now, I've looked at the GPD Pocket in the past, but when they officially dropped support for Linux, I became a little bit skeptical. And even though there are reports that it still works, I figure if I'm going to look at a company that doesn't officially support Linux, why not see what else is out there? I came across the Ocul Sirius A, and it combines the connectivity and functionality that you want with a personal computer with the portability you expect from today's phones. It looks like a wedge phone. Essentially, it looks like a phone with a really fat back end, so it kind of creates a wedge. It has an Intel Atom X7 Z8750 processor, 8 gigs of RAM, and 120 gigabytes of flash storage. Now, they do have it resells for $799. And what I like about it is it literally has the form factor of a phone, but they use the wedge shape of it to incorporate all of the connectors that you would need, like Ethernet, USB, Type-C, those kinds of things. Now, they have a cheaper version, a 4 gig RAM model and a 64 gig flash storage. For $100 less, it's $699, but I'm not interested in that. I'm mostly interested in the 128 and 8 gigabyte RAM. So again, it's called the Ocul Sirius. I haven't made a decision yet if this is something I'm actually going to order. I'm still kind of looking and researching into it, but I'd not come across this, and there are very few actual pocket PCs out there. So this is one of the things that caught my attention. I thought it was pretty interesting, and I'll continue to kind of keep my eye out in this realm to see if something comes up. But eventually I'm going to land on something that I'm just going to take around in my pocket all the time, because more and more I'm finding that I just can't get the level of work done I need to be able to get done on my phone, and it's becoming increasingly inconvenient to carry my backpack with me everywhere when everybody else is able to work just off of their phone. In the news this week, Nextcloud Hub 20 is a dramatic step for users, bringing different platforms they use during the day into an integrated experience. This can reduce friction, improve reaction times, avoid context switching, and ultimately bring greater productivity to tens of millions of users across the globe, all while protecting data security and digital sovereignty of private and enterprise users. So this is a direct quote from Frank Karlachek, obviously talking about Nextcloud Hub 20. The new dashboard provides a great starting point for the day with over a dozen widgets ranging from Twitter, GitHub, Moodle, Zamad are already available. The new dashboard, this is what you have been looking for in a piece of open source software when you're running your business. The amount of time that I take in the morning, which is like a 5 to 10 minute deal, just to go through and open up all of the things and get connected to all of the things just so that I can see what's going to happen for my day. And what Nextcloud is aiming to do here is make work social. Make work social and make your tools social so that they connect to other things. And the reality is Twitter, GitHub, Moodle, Zamad, these are all things that are already part of our daily process, most of us, depending on what industry you're in. And what Nextcloud aims to be is the one-stop shop to get access to all of those things. Now, it gets even better because Talk has been introduced with bridging, so you can get to other platforms to include Microsoft Teams, Slack, IRC, and, you guessed it, Matrix. The notifications and activities were brought together, making sure that you won't miss anything important, and they've added a status setting so that you can communicate to other users what you're up to. Deck, which is... Deck... Count the ways I love thee, integrates with dashboard, search, and introduces calendar integration for card editing and series of smaller improvements. And if you've not used Deck, it's a task management system, and it's fantastic. Now, with Nextcloud 20, Other third-party services such as Microsoft Teams, Slack, Jira, GitHub, Twitter, and dozens of others are being integrated. It adds to the existing strength by using an open application programming interface, the Open Collaboration Services, also known as OCS. This long-established API started as part of KDE's open desktop standardization efforts back in 2009, and OSC now handles basic file functions like access, sharing, versioning, and commenting. It also covers communication, calendaring, and task management. We in the FOSS world are finally getting our game together, and it feels great. Your choices, as of a few weeks ago, were Office 365 and G Suite, and FOSS is finally getting to the point in the world where we can offer this as a real alternative to businesses. The feature set of Nextcloud is so attractive that people are actually excited to switch to a service and excited to move from a proprietary platform to an open source platform. And I've watched this unfold in real life. Why? Because they finally trust the place where they can store their data, because their trust has been abused time after time again. And it's not the data privacy part of it. It's the fact that they're constantly bombarded with a new thing that they have to use, a new tool that they have to migrate their data to, a different place that they have to go, another subscription that they have to have. This is a place where their data is safe, where they pay with their wallet rather than their privacy, and they don't have the hassle of managing an IT infrastructure. They just get the benefits of their friends that have an Office 365 or G Suite subscription. They just show up and the tool works. The difference between this, the free and open source home, and the other home is this doesn't have any bars or gates on the windows or doors. You decide to come in. If you like the party, you're welcome to stick around. If you don't like the party, if you don't like what we have to offer, you're welcome to bail. And this is happening. Companies are doing this, and very, very well recognized names of companies are switching to open source software every single day. And some of them I can talk about and some of them I can't talk about. But I'll give you an example. I went to download firmware from Netgate. So anybody who has done business with Netgate and has downloaded a new firmware image for any of their routers already knows what I'm about to say. Went to Netgate to download firmware image. Found out they're using Nextcloud to distribute their firmware and support their clients with it. Do you know why? Because Netgate gets it. Netgate doesn't want to have an added cost from Dropbox. And they don't want to have to deal with the fact that Facebook is going to shut off access to the EU market because there's a government disagreement. They just want to be able to ship and sell routers. And when people need a firmware, they just need to be people to be able to download that link from their site. And Nextcloud enables them to do that. Nextcloud enables our business to function. Nextcloud enables businesses all across the globe to function. And here's why in particular this is huge. The open collaboration services. This protocol, the ability to bridge and connect to other services is paramount. And I've seen how important this function of bridging is with Matrix. People are happy with all of the tools that Matrix, Teams, Slack, Discord, Facebook Messenger, email, text, it doesn't matter. Most people don't really care what the messaging platform is. It works well enough for them. The problem has become people are just sick of switching. They're sick of having to choose a new platform. They want to pick one thing and be done with it, and they want to stay there. And every time they change jobs, every time the company, even within a certain job, changes, they're back to the beginning, and they have to start all over again. And that gets to be frustrating, and that's difficult for people to internalize. And so anyway, so I'm super happy for what Nextcloud has done there. And the way they're doing this on the back end is they're shipping MatterBridge as a separate app. And this is installed automatically when Nextcloud Talk, when the admin enables the MatterBridge integration. So instead of using the binary that they ship, the admin can also install MatterBridge locally. Now, that connection is a channel per channel. So a channel moderator can configure a bridge in the settings on the right-hand side, and that moderator can choose a protocol like IRC or Slacks or Teams. And once that's enabled, messages to the room are simply bridged, and you can then communicate with multiple channels, or you can sync a lot of things to a single room. So you can create a single talk room that connects to two IRC rooms, a Matrix room, a Teams room. Whenever a user says something in Teams, it gets replicated to the Talk room, the two IRCs room, and Matrix. And when a user says something in Talk, it gets replicated to Teams, the two IRC rooms, and Matrix, so on and so forth. So the bridge keeps running even if you're not logged into the browser. And of course, this addresses one of the key shortcomings back in the IRC days. Slack works with the token. Matterbridge doc is good, but must be carefully followed because of the new Slack app type does not provide compatible tokens, so the classic deprecated app type must be selected. Matrix, as you might expect, is flawless. Classic login, password authentication. Mattermost, as you might expect, flawless. Classic login, password authentication. IRC, basic, no auth, no nick password, but they're extending the configuration. XMPP and Jabber, they don't quite have working yet. They're still working on that. And Microsoft Teams is still being tested, and that's not, I guess, a huge surprise to me because at the end of the day, it's Teams that's going to be somewhat difficult to work with. Now, our next guest is Matthew Miller. He is the Fedora project lead and a guest this hour on the Ask Noah Show. Matthew, thanks so much for taking the time. Welcome into the program.
Hi, Noah. Thanks. Always happy to be here.
I appreciate you taking the time. So let's start with this. Fedora 33 is right around the corner in October, and it comes with a few changes that I kind of wanted to talk to you about. So the first is, what is with Nano? Nano being the default terminal-based text editor. I have been using VI for the last 15 years, ever since I got into it and couldn't figure out how to exit. Why the change?
Oh, yeah, right. Well, exactly. You have just been stuck in that terminal. You're typing a whole bunch of characters in it, hoping something's going to happen. We wanted to make a change that would be more friendly for users who are not used to the command line, not necessarily newbies, but programmers who are used to a GUI environment these days, who are using Git, and they suddenly do a Git commit and they're thrown into a text editor with no hint onto what to do next. So I'm an old school sysadmin. I know how to use VI, but it's not a great editor for just casual editing. It really takes some commitment to become a VI Vim person. And our goal is to, we want to enable people to have that experience, but you shouldn't be dumped into it. Surprise, now you've got to learn challenge. Actually, there was just a Twitter exchange I was seeing about, what Linux needs to do to dominate the world, as people always discuss. And one of the first points someone made is we need to stop making it so that you're bombarded with things that feel like you need to learn new terminology, learn new things just to be able to get, to be accepted into using this operating system. So we want to just smooth that a little bit. That's basically the intention.
I think that makes perfect sense. And the reality is Vim is still there, right? Somebody wants to use it if they're in the habit of typing VI and then opening a text editor. They have the option of doing that, right?
Yeah, and you can set the editor variable to change the default for however you want. True confessions, I actually use the Joe editor most of the time, so okay. I'm already reconfiguring things from the default. So,
well, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad to hear that there is a shifting mentality to be welcoming to new users so they don't feel like they have to learn magical incantations to be able to edit a config file. There is some more exciting stuff, though, that's happening, Matthew. Instead of swap, you are switching to something called ZRAM. ZRAM is a RAM drive that uses compression, and due to that compression, it uses half as much memory as its size. Tell me a little bit about ZRAM and how that works.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everything old is new again. There was something from like the late 80s or 90s that did the same thing in DOS. Sorry, flashback time. But basically, anytime you're hitting swap, it's just so much slower than RAM that it's a bad situation. So we wanted to do something, especially on less memory full laptops and things, to make them able to cope with situations where they get near the edge of that. And basically, only a tiny little bit of memory is used by the RAM drive unless you hit it. And then when you hit swap, whatever would be going to swap on disk ends up being compressed in RAM. And it turns out the stuff that usually goes to swap compresses really well. So 2 times is conservative, maybe even more than that. So it effectively gives you close to having more RAM without actually having more RAM on your system. I have yet to see some really solid performance benchmarks, but just the basic playing around with it, it looks like it's pretty good.
So if you'll excuse my ignorance, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. It's a drive that you create dynamically on RAM itself, and then it's kind of like a reserved emergency portion of RAM that then is written to in the event that the actual memory is running out?
Yeah, it's not even reserved. It grows when needed. So
I see.
You can, it's in some ways it's like if you ever looked at tempfs, like the /temp on Fedora and most Linux distributions, I think now. It basically it's just a file. It looks like a file system. It looks like disk, but if you put stuff in there, they go to RAM instead of going to going onto a disk anywhere. And if you don't have anything there, it doesn't take up any space. So it's basically like that.
So, and again, this is probably mostly due to my ignorance of how memory works. But so if the memory is filling up and the purpose of swap space is if the memory gets too full that the kernel doesn't panic, it can then just write to swap space. How does putting that back into RAM not cause the system to run out of memory?
The magic is this happens to be compressed then. So the stuff that gets put there gets squished down, so it takes up less space than it did when it was in actual memory.
Okay. So it's the compression that actually saves us. I see. Okay,
Yeah,
very cool.
Pretty clever.
It is. And this is going to be the default going forward in 33?
Yeah, for the desktop versions at least. I'm not sure what the cloud and server things are going. And I think that some of the ARM stuff actually already had this previously, so we already tested it out on some of those embedded devices because it makes a really big difference there, obviously, because those tend to have 1, 2, 4 gigabytes of RAM, where it's really painful.
Let's talk a little bit about systemd-resolved. This is being turned on is being enabled by default in Fedora 33, and it's the ability to provide network name resolution for local applications via dbus. Can you talk to me a little bit about what the practical ramifications of this are and how it benefits users?
I think that in most cases, users won't notice if it's a successful change. I know it has a secure DNS component. This is not actually a thing I'm super expert on. In fact, my main feeling right now is I'm a little bit frustrated with it because it's got some rough edges still going into the distro, and we might end up delaying the beta for it. So,
okay.
I don't know. We'll see. Or it might end up getting reverted. I think, it's not something that I've put a lot into. Sorry, I can't give you a good answer on this one.
No, that's perfectly fine. I'm mostly interested in kind of where you're at with that. So this isn't a serious change, but it's pretty cool. You now have an animated background based on the time of day. This is the kind of eye candy, the kind of polish that I think we don't often get in the Linux land, and you're doing it at Fedora. It's cool. Tell me about it.
I love our Fedora design team. We've actually had these a couple times before. Sometimes just timelines and things haven't worked out to do the whole animation. But we have a really awesome community process where for each release, the design team in Fedora, which anybody is welcome to come and join. This is my soapbox. You don't have to be a programmer to be involved in Fedora. In fact, although we always can use programming help and coding and engineering, like the vast need is actually in all these other areas. And we've got a great welcoming design team, and every 6 months or so they work on making this new wallpaper, and it's done a great job. Fedora always looks beautiful because of it. So yeah, it's pretty neat.
That's very cool. And like I said, it's the kind of one extra step of polish that I think is just going to really wow users. So the big news is ButterFS, the new default file system. Now this has been testable in Rawhide as the default file system since early July. Obviously, with ButterFS being the default system in Fedora going forward, you have some new features and some additional functionality that are going to be available to Fedora users now. Compression, cheap writable snapshots, multiple device support, those kinds of things. Talk a little bit about the practical ramifications to the users for going to ButterFS. What are they going to see?
So I think this is another one where I hope users don't see much of a difference if it's successful and it's under the hood kind of improvements. If people notice it a lot, they're probably noticing it because of problems. So I hope nobody notices for the next 6 months or so. And then in the future, it does give some groundwork to make some of those other things you suggested, and advanced users can enable those things now. But for most users, again, like if you have to worry about your file system, it's probably a problem. So hopefully we don't have that happening. In the future, I mean, there's some nice stuff where ButterFS makes sure your data on disk is, the integrity of it is preserved. And so this is actually some of the things we've been struggling with, where some of the I don't know how much background everybody listening to this will have, but the people from Facebook actually were involved in coming to us and saying, hey, we have some Facebook developers who are working on ButterFS. We think this should be the default for Fedora. We've got our experience using this widespread at Facebook to back up how this is a good move to make. And one of the things is that you may have something on, you're using a traditional ext4 or XFS file system, and you end up with corrupted data. You might not even notice, and you may just years later discover that some of your photos are messed up or something. With ButterFS, it tends to be very conservative about there was an error here, and sometimes those errors can end up being, it makes it very hard to recover and access your data when you might not have even noticed a problem on the older file systems. So some of the work that has been going forward at getting this into Fedora and making it the default has been trying to make that recovery more smooth and to make it more clear. Like, the problem here was your drive failed. It wasn't that ButterFS was the problem. This was going to be a problem no matter what, but it looks like ButterFS. Again, if that's happening to people and they're having a bad experience, we want to make sure that they know, what the source of the bad experience is.
You just want the new file system to be in place. We don't actually even necessarily need to take advantage of any of the things that we have. Down the road, maybe, I'll just say 10 versions down the road as to illustrate that I'm not trying to hold you to a timeline here, but it enables you to get to the point where normal people can open up a disk utility or a backup utility or a snapshot utility and just say, make a snapshot of my machine, or even do a snapshot automatically before I update the system. And should I ever run into trouble, I can just roll back. These things now become possible, don't they?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Those are the kind of things that are enabled, and so it'll be exciting to get there. I just want to make sure our first steps go smoothly, because once you have a bad experience with the file system, I think this is a lot of what ButterFS is dealing with now. A lot of people had bad experiences with ButterFS like 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago. And once that happens, you're very reluctant to try it ever again. So we want to make sure that people's first experience is smooth. And then we can get to that cool stuff with the snapshots and like the send receive backups, possibly encryption in new and different ways. And yeah, compression, all those cool things that you can get. But we're just not quite ready for that yet. So we want to move forward, but carefully.
I respect you for that, and the entire Fedora team for taking that approach. That is the right way to go. Move slow, but do it right. I have to ask, Matthew, because this is just fun. I saw your tweet. I have a 6th Gen X1 Carbon. It is by far the best laptop I've ever owned in my life, bar none. So I just have to get your thoughts. What do you think of the 8th Gen X1 that came pre-installed with Fedora?
Oh, it is so nice. I've actually been playing with it and reinstalling it. I'm using my Gen 6 right now for this interview, but I've got it here. I've been messing around with it. The screen is completely gorgeous. It's a 4K screen, and the Wayland scaling just works beautifully. I didn't have any, oh no, everything's too tiny experience with it at all. It just is pure gorgeous. I have it in the backyard. Turn the brightness up, so bright it's like daylight. It overpowers the sun. And the system itself is nice and smooth, and everything just works. And it was so exciting to turn it on, boot it up, and then have the Fedora logo come at me from a computer that came in commercial packaging. So cool.
For those that don't know, this is part of the hardware partnership that you guys have signed with Lenovo to ship Lenovo laptops pre-installed with Fedora. Matthew, what has been the response to the Lenovo partnership with Fedora, and what are the next steps to that program? A lot of people are speculating that this ThinkPad deal was really just the start.
I hope it is, yeah. And the ThinkPad people at Lenovo are looking at doing a lot more Linux enablement across all of their ThinkPad line. Hopefully some of the lower end models as well, but we're focusing on kind of the ThinkPad workstation level line to start with, because that's kind of where the demand came from. And this was demand driven. Their customers said, we want you to ship a laptop with Fedora, please. And so they came to us and said, let's make this happen. And they've just been really pleasant to work with. And I'm really excited about their attitude towards everything, very accommodating towards we want everything to be open source. And they want everything to be, as Fedora produces it, rather than some sort of modified version. We had a tentative meeting. We're like, so you're going to want to put a bunch of apps and stuff on here that are like Lenovo things? And they said, oh, no, none of that. That's not our interest for this model. That's we want the pure experience. So
that is so great. That is awesome. And so because one of the things I walk around Red Hat Tower, and as I walk around and I look at all of the Lenovo ThinkPads that Red Hat is buying, it's clear to me that this large multi-billion-dollar company has an investment in the Linux desktop, and they're displaying that. What they need is a hardware manufacturer to come alongside them and say, here's our world-class software. We would like to compete in this space. Can somebody deliver hardware? And if that partnership exists, and now it does, from my perspective as an owner of an IT company, when I go into places and say, here's something I would recommend you look at, now they can go to the same manufacturer, the same PC supplier that they're purchasing their Windows 10 desktops from, and they can get a computer that has the Fedora operating system installed back by Red Hat, at least developmentally funded by Red Hat. This shifts the paradigm a little bit, Matthew, because now we're in a place where people can order these systems from a PC manufacturer. They arrive, and people just pull them out of the box, and they're able to use it. What kind of support infrastructure is around that, either from the Fedora community or Red Hat, the company?
So, yeah, Red Hat, the company, supports RHEL. RHEL is the product, and Red Hat's has a big investment in the desktop, but that is mostly targeted at the technical workstation space, like animation studios use RHEL Workstation. In the consumer space, that's just a very difficult market, and it's almost not even a market because it's not somewhere you can really make money at. So it's not been a super, Red Hat is an enterprise company, not a consumer company, hasn't been particularly interested. But I think there's a realization that it's strategically important to have a foothold there. And so Red Hat's investment in the Fedora community and in the Fedora desktop community there helps connect into the whole Red Hat ecosystem that Fedora is part of. So our support there is our standard community support. Ask Fedora, askfedoraproject.org is very, very great, quick, friendly, helpful answers. And actually, Lenovo has their own support. So this is the first line of support here is if you've got a problem with it, call Lenovo and they will help you. Even though you say they're not going to do, oh, you're running Linux, never mind. They will actually help you solve your problem. And so you're not just on your own. There's also a Lenovo Fedora forum that people can go to and get help. And some of the people that I've worked with actually on the ThinkPad team are active in that forum. So I know for sure you can get expert responses there.
That's really fantastic. So this has really been thought out end to end. And I commend you and the Fedora team for the unquestionable amount of work that you've had to do to get to this point. How would you pitch Fedora to other hardware manufacturers?
Fedora tends to follow the upstream very quickly, which gives you two advantages. First of all, if your hardware is new, we are likely to have kernel support already, or if you're working in the upstream, you can get support for your hardware there. So it's not something where there's a 5-year-old kernel that you have to figure out how to get it to work. And all of that new software is nice and shiny for users as well. And like I said earlier, we try to make a nice polished new user experience. That balances that getting the new stuff and making it work nicely together as a offering to users. So I think it's definitely something to look into. I think Lenovo came to us saying this people want Fedora, and I hope that people are saying that to the other laptop manufacturers and so on as well, because that obviously works a lot better than us going out and trying to convince a company that it's worthwhile.
Absolutely. There has been a discussion among developers to consider dropping BIOS support and focus exclusively on UEFI. Why is this being considered, and why is that beneficial to most Fedora users?
It is just a lot more modern and a more clean solution. But again, for most Fedora users, I don't think you'll care. It doesn't really matter all that much. That's my honest answer.
Most of the time, if they're using a computer built in the next, last 12 years, 15 years, it probably has UEFI support.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll just work. I think some of the problems are around a lot of the virtualization stuff doesn't necessarily, it'll take a little bit of change in how people set up their virtualization because that tends to use an emulated BIOS, but all things are possible.
Talk to me a little bit about the Ambassador Program. What is the Ambassador Program? Who is the right fit for the Ambassador Program? And tell me a little bit about the Ambassador Program revamp.
Yeah, so Marie Norden, who is our FCAKE, that's Fedora Community Action and Impact Coordinator, which is a fancy title that we came up with because I hate the word community manager. We can talk about that at length if you want to talk about my hate for the term community manager. But anyways, that's a sidetrack. Marie has been working on this with some of the other people, in our Mindshare committee, because it's the team in Fedora that's responsible for our outreach to the world efforts. And I have to rewind a little bit to what the Ambassadors Program is to say the story properly. So it's actually one of the oldest groups that's been active in Fedora, and it's people who are, basically interested in sharing what Fedora as a project is and what our offerings are to other people in the world. And, that's the ambassadorship from Fedora as a project to the outside. And, from the outside, theoretically, back in about what people need. And so this has been, people who go to conferences, back when going to conferences with things, work the booth and the table, go to their, Linux users groups and talk about it, and have student clubs that show off Fedora, that kind of thing. And this was pretty active, 10 years ago, but for various reasons kind of declined in activity. And I've said this other places, but I'll say it again because it was my fault in some ways, because one of the things I did when I first came in as Fedora project leader, I looked at our budget and I was trying to say, how are we getting impact for the money we're spending? We're spending, $15,000 on events in Europe. Where does, what are we getting back from that? That's a lot of money. And the ambassadors at the time in Europe were having a meeting to plan their events for the next year. And one of the things they were planning to do was get together for a laser tag activity as part of the planning. And I was just like, wait, laser tag? Now that sounds like a boondoggle. That's like, you're spending money just for fun and not doing something that benefits Fedora. And so I shut that down. And I think that was, in retrospect, a obvious mistake. It maybe took me a little too long to learn it. But having that kind of fun actually does have meaningful impact because it brings to get people together and makes them a functional team and makes them excited about being part of this. So this is a long way of saying the new ambassadors in the revamp and building it up, we're going to include fun in it. There may actually be laser tag once laser tag is again a thing, but there will be things that are interesting just to be part of the community. And there'll be room for that kind of enjoyment. It doesn't need to be all work. Who should be a Fedora ambassador? Anybody who really is excited about the technology and even more excited about the Fedora community and wants to share that with other people. And if you're a Fedora user and you're like, I would like to give back and get involved, the ambassadors program is a great way to start because it can, you can just take that enthusiasm you have and help spread that to other people.
Matthew, before I let you go, anything else coming up with the Fedora next upcoming release of Fedora 33?
Yeah, the release should be coming out. I'm hoping we're going to have another on-time release with all of these changes. I'm just going to forewarn, if we end up slipping a week or two, it might happen. I know we used to have a pretty bad reputation for never making our deadlines, but we've solidified that a little bit. I hope we get forgiven if, it happens we don't meet this one. But that's part of what happens when you can see the whole schedule and the process. A lot of projects don't tell you when their release day is, so they always feel like they're on time. With Fedora, it's all in the public, so you can see what's going on. But whether or not it's a week or two late, it is going to be another awesome release, both on the desktop and Fedora IoT, which is going to become an addition this time around, so we get kind of a top-level promotion. That's Internet of Things Fedora for running on small devices and using a technology a lot like in CoreOS to make atomic updates and have all your actual workload running in containers. It's a pretty cool thing for doing both home and at scale IoT. That's one of the highlights that I'd feel bad if I hadn't mentioned that, because that's a really cool thing that people behind that put a lot of work into it.
Matthew Miller, he is the Fedora project lead and a guest this hour on the Ask Noah show. Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We'll get you back on the program real soon.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be glad to be back. Maybe after that release comes out, we'll talk about how things went.
That sounds great, Matthew. Indeed, I do have a 7th gen ThinkPad that I'm going to be testing Fedora 33 on, so make sure to stay tuned to that. I'll tell you what I love about Fedora's passion. I have been a Fedora user every version since Fedora 1. And where I think Fedora is unique and where Fedora really fits well is if you are a system administrator and you work day in, day out, and you need the reliability, security, and stability of a company like Red Hat, and you need that on your servers. The nice thing about Fedora is it lets you play a little bit in the land of technology that's up for experimentation, to be later included in CentOS and RHEL. And that relationship that they've had for a very long time serves people very, very well. And no doubt a huge appreciation and a huge congratulations to the Fedora team for landing the deal with Lenovo and delivering these premium computers to people pre-installed with Fedora. It's absolutely fantastic. Hey, like I said, I have in my possession that 7th Gen X1 Carbon, so keep an eye out for a review as well as an update on how well Linux works on it. Huge thanks to Sarah, our call screener, JT, our producer. All of the notes can be found at podcast.asknoahshow.com, so if you want links to the things I'm mentioning, the products I'm talking about, the picks, they're all there. Head over to podcast.asknoahshow.com. Follow us on Twitter to get the latest up-to-date news. We'll be back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central. AskNoahShow.com. See you next week.